Anybody in here think you know who Michael Milken is? Give me some love. Give him some love.
You mean we're not standing for this interview?
We can do it if you like. Michael Milken was just doing steps in the back, by the way. So I need to, when Tip comes out, when Killer Mike comes out, when these rappers come out, when all the entertainers, Reggie Jackson, you know who they are. But I feel really bound up when somebody like Michael Milken shows up. And I gotta thank God. We know we have a lot of builders and achievers and amazing people, and I got one coming up after this that's gonna blow your mind, who's an incredible guy, Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb. And all these people who are coming up and who've been here for 3 days, and folks are going to Davos, and folks are going to President Clinton's conference, and all these, and people going to the UN. He's probably the wealthiest. And here's something I know. He's the only man. Anybody tell your friends in the lobby, come inside. Tell my team, I want everybody to hear this. Come inside, I want you to experience this. Everybody online, streaming, on the networks. I need you to understand what leadership really looks like.
That's you, John. That's what leadership looks like.
No. We're not transferring, no. Do you know the name Reginald Lewis? Reginald Lewis was the first black man on Wall Street to do a $1 billion deal. 1986. When $1 billion was probably today, it would be more like 1985, probably more like $20 billion today as far as a deal size. In 1985, it was unheard of for a black man to do $1 billion deal or a $100 million deal. Michael Milken did this $1 billion deal on the cover of Black Enterprise, on the cover, rightly so, celebrated around the world. This is the man that gave him the $1 billion. Yes. The sellers of the company, many people had questions about Reginald Lewis, and the reason Reginald Lewis had credibility is because Michael Milken said, I got you. Let me tell you a couple companies so Michael has probably financed 3,000 companies, helped and innovate what they call junk bonds, which is really high finance. Of the 3,000 companies, financed a couple $1 trillion of market cap and access to capital. Let me tell you a few companies you might recognize that he financed, he put in business. MTV, Nickelodeon, Viacom, Paramount, Time Warner, MGM, Fox, Turner Broadcasting, and CNN. Mobile phones, the origin of mobile phones, and I think it was
Craig McCaw.
Yep. MCI, Verizon, cable companies, which include Liberty Media and TCI. Liberty Media now owns F1 Racing. So we were in Las Vegas a few weeks ago. We went there to support a charity for Felicia and Ben Horowitz, helping hip hop artists who are trying to retire, and they're raising money so hip hop artists can retire in dignity. So that's their foundation. Yes, Felicia and Ben Horowitz. And as Chaitra and I are driving up to the event, here's a guy coming out with a sparkled entertainer's vest. Him and his two buddies, they just performed as a warm-up act.
We're just a hip-hop group. What can I say?
It was him. Home Builders, Kaufman and Broad. I mean, the list just goes on. This is just a few. If I just had one of these, I'd be happy, right? I just had Reginald Lewis, I'd be happy. And I've never said this in public about you, and I want to make sure we have solid time for you to go through some stats and facts that people need to know about the state of the world. And I want to cover entrepreneurship and health and wellness. You and my wife are very passionate about health and wellness. Let's now talk very quickly about. So it's the rest of the Las Vegas story. I'm so excited. So we're in Las Vegas, and he says, "Call me later." So I sent him an email and called him, and he said, "What are you doing?" "Nothing." And he says, "Well, you want to go? You want to come to lunch?" "Yes." So we're at lunch, and who's the guy who dropped by? The former CEO of Disney?
Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Jeffrey Katzenberg drops by. "Can I talk to you for a minute, Mike?" So he pulls him off. And then before we leave, he and another friend, Mackenzie, who's here, said, "Do you want to go to F1? "Yes." We just figured we'd get some, tickets. We find ourselves right next to, where the cars are going by. Because why? Because it's Michael Milken.
No, because it's John O'Brien who likes to race cars.
Well, that too. Thanks for telling all my business, Michael. Appreciate that. But so now that you've embarrassed me, I'm going to embarrass you. I've never said this in public. Michael Milken was a cheerleader.
Head cheerleader.
Head cheerleader. True story. Tell us this story very quickly. You're in high school. In his high school? In
Yep.
Van Nuys?
That's correct. And it was a very important position to motivate 3,000 to 4,000 students. And I had
Yes.
and I had one of the people on my cheerleading team was a young girl named Sally Fields, who then had a career and has a career in the entertainment business. So, but you're a cheerleader. You get behind an idea. You want people to buy into that idea. And our goal there was school spirit. Be proud of your school. Be proud of yourself. And the school had a championship football team. As we traveled around, we wanted to make sure that we were good representatives of our school.
Now, see, here you go. I thought I was going to give you a whiz bang. I was going to tease you. I was going to put you in a slightly embarrassing moment, and you just flipped the whole thing on me once again. This guy literally has a genius IQ. Like literally. Whatever the topic is, he just, by the way, flew in from the Middle East just for this conference. He was there holding one of his Milken Institute conferences. Milken conferences, you should try to go to it, by the way. It's one of the biggest and most prestigious and most important conferences in the world, Milken Institute. He's a Milken Institute. He's got.
Well, it's gotten a lot more prestigious, John, since you came.
Yeah, whatever.
So what can we say?
He's got the Milken Center for the Advancement of the American Dream. He just bought 6 buildings across from the White House and Treasury Department. Imagine what that security clearance looked like. He bought 6 contiguous buildings. He's building the Milken Center for the Advancement of the American Dream, which is going to be amazing. And by the way, again, Andrew Young quote, "Coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous," is next door to the Freedmen's Bank.
So you talked about the White House and the Treasury, but the Freedom Bank was my bank, my mission. The idea that everyone should have access to capital. And people didn't believe in that. And when I went to Wall Street in '69, there was maybe 10 people that decided whether you had the right to have access to capital. And so my goal was to change it, to democratize, so that everyone with a good idea and opportunity has access to capital. So you needed thousands of people, so that if those 10 people didn't fall in love with you, that you had others that would believe in you. And when it came to mobile phones, no one believed in it, and except myself. And to me, it was I grew up as a Star Trek fan, and I saw Captain Kirk tell Scotty to beam him up, and I couldn't understand why you had to go to where the phone is and why your communication device wasn't with you. But people were quite skeptical with this technology, and the person that invented this technology was a company called AT&T, and they decided not to go into this industry in 1979 because they didn't think that many people would have mobile phones on the planet. And 20 years later, you were selling almost 1 million mobile phones a day, and they thought the whole worldwide demand would be 1 million. So you can have an idea, but you have to make it come to life. And if you wanted Atlanta and you wanted to have the mobile phone franchise for Atlanta, the application only cost $10,000. You could have applied, and many individuals did. But then you had to build it out, and that cost hundreds of millions. And so it's always individuals about an idea. And after the Watts riots in 1965, I wrote down this formula when I was at Berkeley, that prosperity, opportunity, jobs required access to financial capital to multiply the ability of people like John and others that have ideas and abilities. But if you didn't provide financial capital, many of those ideas never became a reality. And so you find individuals in history that made the decision to bet on an individual, financially support an individual, and that individual changes the world. And Reg, to me, was going to change the world. And he didn't have as much capital, but he was the best prepared, knew more about the businesses than anyone else, and he was the best bet. Ted Turner had an idea of all news. No one believed in it. They used to laugh at CNN. They're not laughing anymore today. And so these are the people that have changed the world, and you just need to team up and get that access to capital to them. And I have been so fortunate over the last 50 years to meet individuals that had a dream, had ability, had an idea, and those ideas changed the world. And they just needed a little capital. And that's why in the last 30 years of the 20th century, small businesses like many of yours created more than 60 million jobs once they had access to capital. And the large companies, when they now had to compete on an even playing field, that you had access to capital, you had more ability. They couldn't compete, and they created minus 4 million jobs. So it's always the small, the idea, and whether that idea is Tesla or whether that idea is Amazon, that changed the world in so many ways. And today, I'm happy to tell you there's thousands of points of light that if you have an idea, you just got to make sure you're knocking on the right door.
Absolutely. I'm going to say something a little controversial. I've never said this to you, Mike. We never had this particular conversation. But it struck me as I looked at this list of companies, and then the outliers on this list, people like Reginald Lewis, the minority businesses that you've backed, all of the people on Wall Street now, not all of them, but a lot of folks running major companies on Wall Street now worked for Michael Milken at Lehman Brothers and other places. It strikes me, Mike, going back 30 or 40 years when you pioneered this whole space of alternative finance and et cetera, private equity. You were so pushing the envelope. You were so edgy. You were being inclusive. You're trying to get people to the table who weren't at the table, like Reginald Lewis.
Well, and a threat to the establishment.
That's what I'm getting to. I think that this is why you had some of your problems. They were trying to get you off the stage.
And some people that wanted to be mayor or president also in that process. But I would say one reason I wanted to come here is that my goal was to run a space program. And in 1957, when Sputnik went up, I wrote a letter to the president at the time telling him I was ready to run the space program. I didn't tell him I was 11 years old at the time, but I told him I never missed a math or science problem, and I've been looking at space travel and thinking about it for a long time. I never got a letter back, unfortunately. And so that was my plan. And then the Watts riots happened in Los Angeles, August 11th, 1965. And I was home from Berkeley, and Los Angeles was on fire. You didn't have to go to Vietnam. There were armed personnel carriers on the street. And I told my dad that I couldn't understand it. This was the city of dreams. Didn't feel the discrimination growing up in LA, entertainment industry and others. But here's our city on fire. And I eventually went down and met a young African-American man. And he was sitting there looking at a building that had been burned that he worked in. And he didn't participate in burning it, but he didn't stop anybody. And so when he woke up the next day, he didn't have a job. He didn't have any savings. He was married, had a child. And he told me because of the color of his skin, no one loaned his father any money when he wanted to have a factory, and no one was going to loan him money. And to me, it was just outrageous. I could not believe that. It was irrational. And so I went back to Berkeley, changed my major to finance. And so it was the Watts riots. And when I got married 3 years later, I made sure I got married on August 11th, 1968, not to forget it. And so one of the reasons I'm here is to tell you what was is no more. Today, there's an opportunity for everyone. And Ken Chenault was the head of American Express. He's the chairman of the board of a large private equity firm, but there's many today. And a lot of times you need an entrepreneur. And so we started a program in the 80s identifying young leaders here that in 16 or 17, and I met one of our young entrepreneurs from the Philadelphia area here today.
Nice.
And John's wife is on his board. From the mid-'80s, an entrepreneur that has built numerous businesses. And so sometimes you need a hand, and I saw myself, Branch Rickey took the risk of bringing Jackie Robinson to the majors. And every day, on that his day, in Major League Baseball today, many years later, the players wear number 42. And my grandson, no coaching from me, when he had to write his article in 7th grade of the person he admired most, I'm going over to his house. He's going to make a presentation to the whole school, and lo and behold, it's Jackie Robinson that he's writing about. And we should not forget those people that came first and changed the world.
One of Michael and I, he allows me to debate with him. We were on CNBC last night. If you haven't watched that, it's our top interview from last night on CNBC. You should go and watch that interview we did last night. You'll see a little constructive friction there. He and I debate like he wants to convince me he knows more about black people than I do. Because he's a genius, and he studies this stuff, and he really cares. And on some areas, he actually does know more about the world and where we're going than I do. And sometimes you don't, and so we have that conversation. Can you tell them a little bit?
That's how we learn from each other,
That
right?
That is. And I love that you love to not only talk, you love to listen. You're still learning. at this point in your life, with all your success, you're still learning. And you're still thriving, and he was the most frustrated just sitting backstage doing nothing. He feels like he needs to do something, solve something, go something, do something. And finally we have you here. I want to cover one thing in particular. I want to make sure we don't run out of time for it. I want you to cover the statistics and the data, not now, before we wrap, on where the world's going, all right? But before we get there, I want to get personal for a minute. 30 years ago, you were told you had 18 months to live. You had prostate cancer. And you're obviously still here.
1 in 4 African-American men get prostate cancer.
1 out of 4 African-American men. Ambassador Young had prostate cancer, I'm pretty sure. Hank Aaron, I'm pretty sure, was successfully had it cured. But, and I go get checked, by the way, every year. Everybody should get checked. The largest funder of prostate cancer research in the world. The largest funder of, but it's not just prostate cancer, what else is it?
Well, many. Melanoma, many other fields.
The largest. How did you cure? You were told, the doctor said, write your will, get your affairs in order. You got 18 months to live, and you use that genius brain of yours and said, hell no, I got stuff to do. How did you turn it around? Again, I want to save time for your vision for the world, but how did you solve it? He's got a book out now, by the way, that he's signing for everybody. How did you solve it?
Faster cures. It's available to everyone. I would say I tried to figure out what everyone in my family didn't do. I had 10 members of my family die from cancer.
Wow.
And when you say that, John, I remember I traveled the country visiting with people. We had been funding medical research for 20 years, many other areas, but not in prostate cancer. And I eventually went to the head of urology oncology and my wife, and I sent him all my records, and I was looking for a solution. And his solution was I should get a psychiatrist for myself. We should get a psychologist for our children. And I should get my affairs in order. And I told him I really appreciate the advice, but I'm going to try to do a few things first. And I think what we looked at is what was going on in medical research. And 30 years ago, people weren't sharing their research. Mm-hmm. You'd go and talk to a person who was working on something, and they tell you, well, I have this article coming out in Nature or Cell in a month or 3, and after that we'll share it. And so we set up a program that if you wouldn't share your work and you wouldn't work as a team, then we didn't fund you. And if someone said, well, they couldn't share, I'd say, well, that's because your work is so important, you don't need our money. And within 6 months, every single person shared. And then the country for a decade have been trying to increase the National Institute of Health budget. And what we concluded was there's 10,000 diseases. Everyone's talking to their senator, their congressman, their president, and asking for money, and it's too diffuse. So what we did is we asked everyone to just stand down. Give us 2 years. And we're going to focus just on cancers, all cancers, because in the early 90s, people felt the big C, you were going to die. If people didn't tell people they had cancer because they didn't want to lose their job. And so we focused on cancer, and we told every disease, diabetes, muscular dystrophy, everyone, that we will go to double the amount of money you can if you can just let us focus on cancer and doubling the NIH budget. And so in 1998, we put on this march in Washington. We had learned a lot from Martin Luther King and putting a march on in Washington, and so we were going to put a march on in Washington to end cancer. And The request was the doubling of the National Institute budget. And 2 months after the march, the President of the United States, President Clinton, signed into law the doubling of the budget. And since then, we've had $500 billion incremental funding. And that is one of the reasons why we had a vaccine for COVID in less than a year. The first human being was inoculated with the Moderna vaccine 9 weeks after we sequenced the genome of that virus, 9 weeks. And they've been studying this concept of RNA, where your own immune system can be motivated and energized to make an immunity for yourself. And so it's changed the world, but that investment in medical research has paid off, and it's the #1 driver of the world's economy, is public health and medical research. And we have more than doubled the life expectancy on this planet in a little more than 100 years. It was 4 million years of evolution, and we extended average life expectancy by 11 years. In the last 120 years, we've extended life expectancy by more than 40. And it's not just length of life, it's the quality of life. And I wrote that book, Faster Cures, to tell you the best is yet to come.
And all that's great, and that's fantastic, and really important. But what'd you do to stay alive? When you were told you had 18 months to live, you didn't cook things for 2 years?
I only ate fruits and vegetables raw for 2 years, because you can change how your genes are expressed by changing your microbiome. And I would say to you, it's been a quest for more than 30 years. We came up with a new periodic table. You might have studied oxygen or hydrogen when you were in school, but we created this table of what does broccoli do? What does Brussels sprouts do? What do all these things do? Why are they on this planet? What was their purpose from that standpoint? And so the food chain is going to change, and we can create healthy humans, healthy planet. We grew 72 billion animals last year to feed human beings. We caught 100 billion fish. And so in doing that, 10 of the 20 major things that infect the environment is growing something for you to eat. And by going to a plant-based diet, you can be healthier, you can be safe, and as you know today, it's becoming more mainstream. You can go to college campuses and find 10% of the kids today are vegetarians. And so we're going to change the food chain, and we're going to change your life. It'll be healthier and it'll be longer.
I'm not a vegetarian, but thanks to my wife, I'm a flexitarian. I still like ribeyes, but I eat more fruits, more fish, more fruits and vegetables. I try to make sure there's something green on every plate food that I have. I try not to eat processed food. Shaitra says that being healthy is 80% what you put in your mouth and 20% working out. And when she told me that inflammation, that 80% of all diseases lives on inflammation, it stopped me cold. Most people are not fat, they're inflamed. And you can solve that. And when I say we need to make smart sexy, this is what I mean. We got to get out of the rhetoric, get into the details of life.
You can go online today and look for foods that are anti-inflammatory. I don't know if anyone in the audience ever eats Greek yogurt today, but there's been a dramatic change because the old yogurt was inflammatory and Greek yogurt is not. And so, unfortunately, Yoplait and many of the leading yogurt companies didn't understand that eventually science was going to change what yogurt you eat. And so, but we have this thing John called the Global Gourmet Games every year, where we serve you food and you have to figure out what's in it. We're going to invite you next year and see if you can tell the difference between spaghetti bolognese with filet mignon and spaghetti bolognese with tofu. We'll see if you can tell the difference.
No, so Shatra, she has, by the way, she has a wellness, she had a whole 360 wellness thing that we've done here because we believe in health, wealth and health, and they're now connected as a philosophy. And she has been educating me on all this stuff. And she messed with me one day. We were in Maui and she made some chocolate chip cookies, and I thought she'd lost her mind because I was being able to eat chocolate chip cookies. So I killed it. I ate as many as I could before she remembered what she had done. And I was overdosing on chocolate chip cookies, and it was all over my face. And she looked at me. She said, "You enjoy that?" "Oh, that was fantastic." And I'm trying to change the topic before she remembers that she's fed me something unhealthy. And she says, "John, they're vegetarian cookies. They were delicious. The cream I put in my coffee now is completely natural, and I go to cryotherapy. I mean, I really believe in this now." And she might have saved my life, actually, because my blood pressure was through the roof. And I want you guys to take your health seriously. This is not the conversation I thought I'd have with Mike, but this is really important.
Well, we can talk about the world, but I want you to know that in the last 6 to 8 years, we've been able to reduce the death rate from cancer by African American men by 50%.
Whoa. Say that again. I need the world to hear that. Say it again. What happened?
We started this program with the VA to give equal treatment. And so when you enter the VA system, you also enter the leading cancer center in the community. And we have latest technology and everything. And in the last 6 years, 8 years, we've reduced the death rate for African American men by 50% from cancer. So should we spend a minute on the world?
Yeah, we are.
You're
By the way, Mike, you just might make it into heaven. You just might. You just might make it into heaven. You're pretty good. You're a pretty good guy. You've done your part. So we're out of time, but we're out of time. We had one more mega session. Are we okay? Yeah. I know we're going a little over. You enjoying this? Yeah. So Michael doesn't do these meetings. I'm glad he's doing it with us. I need you to pivot now. You and President Clinton have said something to me is very powerful. Intelligence is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. I need you to spend 3 minutes telling us where the world is going. Give us a demographic map.
Well, America is changing. You know it. Unfortunately, most people do not know it. 1960s, 75% of everyone born in the United States that was not born here. So everyone here, not born here, came from Europe. And 10% from Canada. 85% of all the immigrants to this country came from Europe or Canada. Today, most of all the immigrants that have come to this country have come from Latin America, they've come from Asia, and increasingly, and the fastest growing group is from sub-Saharan Africa. And so there are more people that were born in sub-Saharan Africa today in the United States than were born in Europe. And so the United States will be a Latin American, Asian, African country. How will you lead? And unless everyone feels they have a chance, we're not going to lead in the right direction. And so this is the future of this country. And we've got to make sure that people feel they have the opportunity so they'll believe in the free enterprise system 20, 30, 40 years ago. And the rest of the world is changing dramatically. So over the last 2,000 to 3,000 years, the world, the research, what went on was really dominated by the northern hemisphere. Egypt might have been at one time the leading civilization, but it shifted north. But what's happened in the Northern Hemisphere is a substantial reduction in the birth rate. And so in the United States, we have the lowest birth rate ever recorded today. It's below replacement levels. So if we didn't have immigrants, our population would be shrinking today. And that's the way it is in Europe, and that's the way it is in China. China had less than 10 million children born last year. At one time, they had 25 million children born a year. And that is why the United Nations is now projecting that within 100 years, Nigeria will have more people than China.
Wow.
And so the change that's occurring, so when you look at a map, it really doesn't tell you the way the world's going to be. So if you look at a map, you'll see the United States is much larger than Nigeria, substantially larger than Nigeria. And if you look at the population today, U.S. population is 1.5 times Nigeria. But if you look at the birth rate in Nigeria today, for every child born in the United States, substantially more children are born in Nigeria, and it won't be long before Nigerians' population is substantially bigger than the United States. And in fact, as I mentioned to John last night, there are more children born in Nigeria, 8.75 million, than all of North America combined, which is a little more than 6. There are more children born in Nigeria than all of Latin America. There are more children born in Nigeria than all of Europe, from Ireland to Russia. And Nigeria has the 10th highest birth rate in sub-Saharan Africa. 9 other countries even have a higher birth rate than Nigeria. So if you're looking where is the world going to grow, it's going to grow in sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe the UN is projecting 1.5 billion people. And so if we don't create opportunities there, they'll be on the move. There were 50 million people that came from Europe to the United States in the 1800s. There were no airplanes. It was dangerous travel. They couldn't see the United States. They heard about the United States. Well, today, a young mother in Angola or Zambia, she can see Barcelona on her phone. More than 80% of everyone in sub-Saharan Africa has a mobile phone today. They can see the life, and if she's worried about feeding her children, she's on the move. And when you see and read about these tragedies of people trying to cross the Mediterranean into Italy or Spain or Turkey, and boats sinking and people dying, they're moving there for a better life for their children, just like 200 years or 300 years ago, people moved here for a better life for their family. And so today, one of the highest performing educational groups in America are Nigerians. They have come and they're changing America today, but those 1.5 billion incremental people, while the rest of the world shrinks in terms of its population, will either find those opportunities there or they will be here. And so for the future of our country to be a beacon of the American dream, we have to make sure everyone who was born in Latin America or their ancestors or Africa or Asia feels they have a chance at the American dream, and that is why we're building that center right next to Freedom Bank there in Washington, D.C.
We're honored to have you here. I'll be working with you, Mike, with the Freedmen's Bank legacy to carry it forward. Wale Adeyemo, Secretary of the Treasury's office, Deputy Secretary was here earlier. We talked about that. It is a coincidence of nature, of God, to have the Freedmen's Bank and the MCAD, Milken Center for the Advanced American Dream, not right next to each other in Washington. What's the chances of that? As we wrap this up, let me say this. I think it was Reverend Jesse Jackson who told me this joke. He said, John, there was these hobos, and they were on a train. And I'm paraphrasing now where Michael Milken was going with this. They were on a train, and they didn't pay for passage on the train. Got kicked off the train. And these two hobos get kicked off this train. Owners, the shareholders of the train wanted people who pay, who understood passage and had enough income for the train. Get kicked off the train. Hobo number one says, man, I'm so angry, I think I'm gonna buy this here train system. The other hobo said, man, I'm so angry, I'm gonna sell it to you. Both of them so broke they can't pay attention. We've got to stop being emotional. We got to stop being angry. We got to stop pointing fingers. Let me make this very clear to you. If we be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. If we don't educate ourselves in financial literacy, if we don't understand what Michael's been talking about, if we don't decide to make a case for optimism, if we don't become entrepreneurs and wealth creators, yes, this country will be a majority of minorities within 30 or 40 years, and we will be broke. We have got to use our genius and our talent for something other than just sports and entertainment, which we have done brilliant at. Whatever we apply ourselves with, we kill it. The rules are published and the playing field is leveled, and we kill it. Black folks and brown folks, we've been doing so much with so little for so long, we can almost do anything with nothing. If we did that in sports and entertainment and in government, can't we now do this with entrepreneurship and capitalism? So I give this last award for the day to Michael Milken for one simple reason. Because in 1985 and 86, when I was a young man, you pointed the light for inclusive capitalism. You gave people a voice that weren't at the table. And you actually had the business plan for the future of America. And I'm going to translate it this way. My rich friends need my poor friends to do better, if only to stay rich. And you financed Reginald Lewis. And just because you financed Reginald Lewis, I'm giving you an award. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, brother.
Michael Milken, everybody. Love you, man. Did you enjoy this? Yeah. We got one more powerful session. Say thank you to Michael Milken.